The morning mist clung to the ancient ridgelines of the Appalachian Trail like secrets waiting to be discovered. For hikers, these mountains represent freedom, adventure, the call of the wild. But sometimes the wilderness keeps what it takes. Sometimes people walk into these woods and simply vanish, leaving behind only questions that echo through the valleys for years. October 12, 2014. The leaves were at their peak, painting the mountainsides in brilliant reds and golds. It was the perfect weekend for a father-son hiking trip. Michael Harrison, a 42-year-old accountant from Richmond, Virginia, had been planning this adventure with his 16-year-old son Tyler for months. They weren't inexperienced weekend warriors. Michael had been hiking these trails since college, and Tyler, despite his age, was an Eagle Scout with survival skills that impressed even seasoned outdoorsmen. The plan was simple: 3 days, 2 nights, covering a 30-mile stretch of the Appalachian Trail through Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains. They'd start at Rockfish Gap, hike north through some of the most beautiful terrain on the East Coast, and finish at Swift Run Gap, where Michael's wife, Sarah, would pick them up Sunday evening. It was supposed to be their last big adventure before Tyler started his senior year and began thinking seriously about college. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as father and son loaded their packs into the car that crisp Saturday morning. She'd made them extra sandwiches, worried they wouldn't eat enough. Tyler bounced with excitement, his new hiking boots still stiff and unmarked. Michael double-checked their supplies one more time, the way he always did. Water purification tablets, first aid kit, emergency whistle, GPS device, fully charged satellite communicator. He was methodical, careful, the kind of man who left nothing to chance. "We'll call you tonight from High Top Hut," Michael promised, kissing Sarah goodbye, "and we'll see you Sunday at 6 sharp." Those were the last words Sarah would ever hear her husband speak. Sunday evening came and went. 6 o'clock passed, then 7, then 8. Sarah's calls went straight to voicemail. The satellite communicator showed no recent activity. By 9 o'clock, she was pacing the parking lot at Swift Run Gap, her headlights cutting through the darkness, hoping to see 2 familiar figures emerging from the trail. But the forest remained silent. The search began at first light Monday morning. Shenandoah National Park rangers mobilized quickly, dispatching teams along the planned route. The weather had been perfect all weekend, no storms, no emergency conditions that might explain a delay. Michael's car sat exactly where they'd left it at Rockfish Gap, undisturbed, keys still hidden in the magnetic box under the rear bumper, just as planned. The trail register at the starting point told the beginning of their story. Michael's neat handwriting documented their departure. M. Harrison and Son, October 12, 14, 3-day northbound hike to Swift Run Gap. His signature was confident, routine, the mark of someone who'd done this dozens of times before. Search dogs picked up their scent immediately. For the first 8 miles, the trail was clear. Rangers found evidence of their passage, a candy wrapper that Tyler had dropped, Michael's initials carved into a fallen log where they'd stopped for lunch, exactly the kind of thing he'd done since Tyler was small. Everything pointed to a normal, uneventful hike. Then, at mile marker 8.5, something changed. The dogs stopped. They circled, whined, and lost the scent completely. It was as if Michael and Tyler had simply stepped off the trail and vanished into thin air. "That's not normal," said Ranger Patricia Mills, a 20-year veteran who'd seen her share of missing hikers. "Dogs can track a scent for days, even after rain. But here, it just stops, like they were never here at all." The search expanded rapidly. Helicopters buzzed overhead, thermal imaging cameras scanning the dense canopy. Ground teams combed every ridge, every hollow, every stream crossing within a 10-mile radius. Volunteers poured in from hiking clubs across Virginia. Michael's colleagues from the accounting firm took vacation days to join the search. Tyler's classmates organized fundraisers to support the effort. For 2 weeks, the mountains crawled with searchers. They checked every shelter, every camping spot, every dangerous cliff face where someone might have fallen. They found nothing. No torn fabric caught on branches, no dropped equipment, no signs of a struggle or accident. It was as if father and son had been erased from existence somewhere between mile 8 and mile 9 of their journey. The investigation into their disappearance revealed a family with no secrets, no reasons to vanish voluntarily. Michael's finances were solid, his marriage happy, his relationship with Tyler close and supportive. Tyler was excited about his senior year, already accepted to Virginia Tech on early admission. These weren't people running from anything. They were living the kind of life others envied. But the wilderness doesn't care about your circumstances or your plans. The Appalachian Mountains have swallowed hikers before, and they would again. After a month of intensive searching, the official effort was scaled back. The case remained open, but resources were redirected to other emergencies, other missing persons who might still be saved. Sarah refused to give up. She organized monthly search parties, recruited volunteers online, hired private investigators who found nothing new. She plastered missing person flyers across Virginia, created websites, offered rewards that grew larger each year. The hiking community embraced the mystery, sharing the story on forums and social media. But leads led nowhere, tips proved false, and hope faded like morning mist in the mountain sun. Years passed. The initial media attention died down. The search parties grew smaller, less frequent. Some people began to whisper that maybe Michael and Tyler had started new lives somewhere else, though no one who knew them truly believed it. Others suggested more sinister possibilities, human predators who might have targeted the isolated hikers. But without evidence, theories remained just that. Tyler would have graduated high school in 2015. Sarah attended the ceremony alone, accepting his honorary diploma with tears streaming down her face. She kept his bedroom exactly as he'd left it that October morning. Michael's clothes still hung in their closet. Their coffee maker still brewed 2 cups each morning out of habit. The anniversary became an annual pilgrimage. Every October 12th, Sarah would drive to Rockfish Gap and hike the first 8 miles of their planned route, always stopping at the point where the dogs had lost the scent. She'd sit on a fallen log, sometimes for hours, listening to the forest sounds and hoping for some sign, some clue that everyone else had missed. "I know they're out there," she would tell reporters who still occasionally called on slow news days. "Somewhere in these mountains, I can feel it. A mother knows." By 2020, the case had become local legend, one of those unsolved mysteries that hikers shared around campfires. The story grew with each telling. Some said they'd been taken by a cult that lived deep in the wilderness. Others whispered about strange lights seen in the sky that October weekend. A few claimed to have spotted 2 figures matching their description on distant ridges. All was just out of reach. All was vanishing when approached. The truth, as it often does, remained hidden in the mountains themselves. Somewhere among the endless ridges and hidden valleys, the forest kept its secrets. Michael and Tyler Harrison had become part of Appalachian folklore, their story joining the countless others who'd walked into the wilderness and never walked out. But secrets, like everything else in nature, eventually surface. Sometimes it takes a decade. Sometimes it takes a stranger, hiking alone on a trail that most people avoid, to stumble across something that changes everything, something that proves the mountains never forget, even when everyone else has moved on. The discovery was still 3 years away, waiting in a place where no search party had ever looked, where no helicopter had ever circled, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to venture off the marked trails and into the true heart of the wilderness. The summer of 2024 brought record rainfall to the Blue Ridge Mountains. Streams that normally trickled became raging torrents. Trails that had been walked by thousands of hikers over the decades were washed out, reshaped, carved into new patterns by the relentless water. When the rains finally stopped in late August, the landscape had changed in ways both subtle and dramatic. Marcus Chen had been planning his solo backpacking trip for months. A software engineer from Atlanta, he'd grown tired of crowded trails and touristy overlooks. He wanted solitude, the kind of wilderness experience that required real effort to reach. His research had led him to an unofficial trail system that branched off from the main Appalachian corridor, following old logging roads and game paths into some of the most remote terrain in Virginia. September 15, 2024. Marcus shouldered his pack at dawn, leaving his Honda Civic in the same parking area where Michael Harrison had left his car exactly 10 years earlier. But Marcus wasn't following the established trail. His GPS showed a route that would take him deep into the backcountry, through areas marked on topographic maps as Roadless Area and Wilderness Study Zone. The first few miles were brutal. No maintained trail, just faint deer paths and occasional blazes left by hunters decades ago. Marcus pushed through thickets of mountain laurel, scrambled over deadfall, and navigated by compass when the canopy grew too thick for GPS signals. This was exactly the kind of challenge he craved, the antithesis of his cubicle existence. By afternoon, he'd reached a ridge system that wasn't marked on any hiking map. The views were spectacular, layer after layer of mountains stretching to the horizon, but Marcus was more interested in what lay ahead. His planned route would take him down into a valley that satellite imagery suggested contained the remnants of an old settlement, possibly a logging camp from the early 1900s. The descent was treacherous. Recent rains had made the slope unstable, and more than once Marcus had to grab saplings to keep from sliding down the mountainside. But as he worked his way lower, following what might have been an old roadbed, he began to see signs of human activity. Rusted metal fragments, rotten wooden posts, the geometric lines of structures slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The valley floor was a maze of overgrown foundations and collapsed buildings. Marcus spent an hour exploring, photographing the ruins with his digital camera. This had definitely been a substantial operation, probably active in the 1920s or 1930s before the creation of Shenandoah National Park. Most hikers never saw places like this, hidden gems that required serious bushwhacking to reach. As the afternoon light began to fade, Marcus started looking for a campsite. He needed flat ground, access to water, and some protection from the wind that was picking up as evening approached. That's when he noticed something that didn't belong with the old logging equipment and cabin foundations. 50 yards from what had been the main building, partially hidden behind a massive oak tree, sat the rusted shell of a vehicle. Not a logging truck or piece of industrial equipment, a car. And not just any car, but something much more recent than the 1920s, relics scattered throughout the valley. Marcus approached carefully, his hiking boots crunching through decades of accumulated leaves. The vehicle had been there for years, that was obvious. Vines grew through broken windows. Moss covered the hood and roof so completely that the original color was impossible to determine. But the shape was unmistakably modern, probably from the 1990s or early 2000s. The license plate was still attached to the rear bumper, though badly corroded. Marcus cleared away the moss and dirt with his knife, squinting at the faded letters and numbers. Virginia plates. The registration sticker was too deteriorated to read, but something about the shape of the letters looked familiar. He circled the vehicle, looking for clues about how it had gotten there. There was no road, no trail wide enough for a car to navigate. The nearest accessible point was miles away, up steep terrain that would challenge even an experienced hiker. Yet here it was, sitting in this forgotten valley like it had been dropped from the sky. The driver's side door was ajar, hanging loose on rusted hinges. Marcus pulled it open, metal screaming in protest. The interior was a study in decay. The seats were rotted through, springs and stuffing exposed to years of weather through the broken windows. Small animals had nested in the dashboard. Everything made of fabric or leather had long since deteriorated. But in the glove compartment protected by the metal housing, Marcus found something that made his blood run cold. a vehicle registration card, water-damaged but still partially readable. The name at the top was faded but unmistakable, Michael Harrison. Richmond, Virginia. Marcus sat back on his heels, staring at the document in disbelief. He'd heard the story, of course. Every serious Appalachian trail hiker knew about the father and son who'd vanished in 2014. It was one of those cautionary tales that reminded you how quickly the wilderness could turn deadly, how even experienced hikers could simply disappear without a trace. But Michael and Tyler Harrison had been on foot. They'd left their car at the trailhead 10 miles away and on the other side of a mountain ridge. How had Michael's vehicle ended up here in this remote valley that wasn't accessible by any road? Marcus pulled out his satellite communicator, but the device showed no signal in the deep valley. He'd have to climb back up to the ridge to make contact with the outside world. But first, he needed to document everything: the car, its location, its contents, anything that might provide answers to questions that had haunted a family for a decade. He photographed the vehicle from every angle, then began a systematic search of the interior. Most personal items had been destroyed by time and weather, but in the center console, he found something that stopped him cold: a cell phone, an older model iPhone in a waterproof case. The case had protected it from the worst of the elements, though the device itself was clearly dead after years of exposure. More disturbing were the items scattered around the car's interior: camping gear that looked newer than the vehicle itself, a backpack that hadn't been there as long as the car, hiking boots that showed recent wear. It was as if someone had been using this place, visiting it, maybe even living here temporarily. Marcus checked his watch. Evening was approaching, and he needed to make camp soon, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone in this valley, that eyes were watching him from the forest shadows. The hair on the back of his neck stood up as he realized the implications of what he'd found. If this was Michael Harrison's car, then the official story was wrong. The father and son hadn't simply gotten lost on the trail. Something else had happened, something that had brought them here to this hidden valley, miles from their planned route. But what? And more importantly, who had been maintaining the campsite that Marcus could now see was set up near the vehicle? The sun was setting behind the ridge, casting long shadows across the valley floor. Marcus needed to make a decision: set up camp here and risk whatever presence he sensed in the darkness, or climb back up the treacherous slope in failing light to reach a safer location. As he stood there weighing his options, a sound drifted through the forest. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the direction of the old logging camp. Someone was walking through the ruins, moving with the confidence of familiarity. Someone who knew this place well. Marcus grabbed his pack and melted into the forest, his heart pounding as he realized that the Harrison mystery was far from over. 10 years after their disappearance, someone was still here in this forgotten valley. Someone who might have answers, or someone who might be the reason Michael and Tyler Harrison had never made it home. Marcus crouched behind a massive fallen chestnut tree, his breathing shallow and controlled. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by the soft scrape of something being dragged across the forest floor. Through the gathering dusk, he could make out a figure moving between the ruins with practiced ease, someone who clearly knew every root and rock in this hidden valley. The person stopped near what had been the main logging building, just 30 yards from where Marcus hid. In the fading light, he could see it was a man, tall and lean, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been cobbled together from military surplus and hunting gear. The man's hair was long and unkempt, his beard streaked with gray. He moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd spent years in the wilderness. What chilled Marcus to the bone was what the man was dragging: a large canvas tarp, heavy with something inside. The man positioned it carefully near a stone foundation, then began methodically unpacking items from a worn backpack, a camp stove, canned goods, a sleeping bag that looked newer than everything else about him. This wasn't a random encounter. This person lived here, or at least spent significant time here. And given the location of Michael Harrison's vehicle, the implications were terrifying. Marcus watched as the man lit the camp stove with practiced movements, the blue flame casting dancing shadows across his weathered face. In that flickering light, Marcus caught a glimpse of features that made his stomach lurch. The bone structure, the way he held his head, something familiar despite the wild appearance and decade of aging. The man opened a can of beans and began eating directly from the container, his eyes constantly scanning the forest around him. Even in this remote location, he remained alert, watchful, like someone who'd learned that safety was always temporary. As full darkness settled over the valley, the man's routine became more elaborate. He spread the tarp near his camp, revealing what Marcus had hoped he wouldn't see. Bones, human bones, arranged with disturbing care on the canvas. Some were yellowed with age, others looked more recent. The man began sorting through them like a collector organizing a prized collection. Marcus's satellite communicator buzzed softly in his pocket. A weather alert. The slight vibration sounded like thunder in the silent forest. The man's head snapped up immediately, his eyes scanning the darkness with predatory intensity. "I know you're there," the man called out, his voice carrying the rough quality of someone who rarely spoke aloud. "Been watching you since you found the car. Took you longer than I expected." Marcus remained frozen, hoping the shadows would conceal him. But the man stood slowly, moving toward his hiding spot with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where to look. "Saw you taking pictures. Documentation. Very thorough, just like his father was." The man's voice carried a strange mixture of approval and menace. "You can come out now. We need to talk." Left with no choice, Marcus emerged from behind the fallen tree, his hands visible and empty. Up close, the man was even more unsettling. His eyes held the flat, emotionless quality of someone who'd crossed lines that most people couldn't even imagine. "You found Michael's car," the man continued conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather, probably wondering how it got here. Probably wondering what happened to them, the father and son, the Harrison boys. "You know what happened to them," Marcus said, fighting to keep his voice steady. The man smiled, revealing teeth stained by years of poor hygiene and mountain water. "Know what happened?" "Son, I am what happened to them, or rather, I'm what became of one of them." The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. The facial structure he'd thought looked familiar, the way the man moved, certain gestures that seemed practiced despite the feral appearance. This wasn't just someone who knew about the Harrison disappearance. This was Tyler Harrison himself, aged 10 years, by whatever nightmare had consumed him in this valley. "Tyler died on that trail," the man continued, settling back down near his camp. 16-year-old Boy Scout with his whole life ahead of him. What you're looking at is what grew in his place, what the mountains made of him. Marcus's mind raced, trying to process the implications. If this was Tyler Harrison, then where was his father? And what had transformed an Eagle Scout into the disturbing figure sitting before him? "My father," the man said, as if reading Marcus's thoughts, "didn't adapt as well as I did. The wilderness demands sacrifices. Some people can pay the price, others become the price." The bones on the tarp took on a new, horrific meaning. Marcus realized he was looking at more than just evidence of the Harrison disappearance. This was a killing ground, a place where hikers who ventured too far off the established trails came to die. "How many?" Marcus whispered. "Lost count after the first few years. Hikers get curious, you know? They see the old logging roads on their GPS, think they're discovering something new. They follow the trails into my valley, and I give them exactly what they're looking for. Adventure, the kind they'll never forget." The man began moving again, this time toward a pile of equipment that Marcus hadn't noticed in the darkness. Ropes, knives, items that had clearly been taken from previous victims, a collection built over years of patient hunting. "You're probably wondering why I'm telling you all this," Tyler continued. "Most people, I don't bother with conversation. But you're different. You found my father's car. You documented everything properly. You have skills I can use. Marcus backed away slowly, calculating distances to the tree line. The slope behind him was steep and treacherous, but it might be his only chance. In the darkness, with adrenaline and desperation driving him, he might be able to disappear into the forest before Tyler could follow. "The thing about living off the grid for 10 years, Tyler said, pulling a hunting knife from his belt, is that you learn to read people, their body language, their intentions. You're thinking about running, about climbing back up that ridge and calling for help." The blade caught the firelight as Tyler tested its edge with his thumb. A thin line of blood appeared, which he licked away with disturbing casualness. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to help me with my current project. There's work that needs doing, and 2 people can accomplish it faster than 1. After that, we'll see if you have what it takes to survive out here, to become what this place demands." Marcus didn't wait to hear more. He spun and ran toward the slope, crashing through the underbrush with no concern for stealth. Behind him, he heard Tyler laugh, a sound that had nothing human left in it. The climb was a nightmare of loose rock and tangled vegetation. Marcus's headlamp beam danced wildly as he scrambled upward, using roots and saplings to pull himself toward the ridge. His lungs burned, his legs screamed in protest, but terror drove him forward. Tyler wasn't following immediately. That was almost worse than being pursued. It suggested confidence, the patience of a predator who knew his territory better than any prey could hope to learn it. Halfway up the slope, Marcus's satellite communicator finally found a signal. With shaking hands, he activated the emergency beacon, sending his GPS coordinates to search and rescue services. But even if they responded immediately, it would be hours before help arrived, hours he'd have to survive in Tyler Harrison's hunting ground. A sound from below made him freeze. Tyler was climbing now, moving with the sure-footed grace of someone who'd spent a decade navigating these slopes. He wasn't hurrying. He knew exactly where Marcus was going, and he knew there was nowhere to run once he reached the top. The ridge offered no sanctuary, only the choice of which direction to flee. Marcus could try to reach his car, but Tyler would anticipate that route. He could follow the unmarked trails deeper into the wilderness, but that would only take him further from help and deeper into Tyler's domain. As Marcus crested the ridge, his headlamp illuminated something that made his blood freeze. Markers. Wooden stakes driven into the ground at regular intervals, forming a perimeter around the valley below. Each stake bore carved symbols that meant nothing to Marcus, but clearly served as warnings or territorial markers for Tyler. This wasn't random violence. This was a system, a carefully maintained operation that had been running for years, while the outside world assumed the Harrison family was simply another tragic hiking accident. The sound of Tyler's approach was getting closer. Soon he'd reach the ridge, and the real hunt would begin. Marcus had to make a choice: try to outrun a predator on his home ground or find somewhere to hide until help arrived. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, dark and full of secrets that had been accumulating for decades. Somewhere in that wilderness, the truth about Michael Harrison's final moments waited to be discovered. Somewhere in those shadows, other victims' remains lay scattered and forgotten. But first, Marcus had to survive the night. He had to become the first person in 10 years to escape Tyler Harrison's valley and live to tell the story. The emergency beacon was broadcasting his location, but rescue teams would need time to organize and navigate to this remote area, time that Tyler Harrison had no intention of giving him. Marcus's headlamp beam cut through the darkness as he stumbled along the ridge, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The emergency beacon pulsed steadily in his pack, broadcasting his location to rescue services that might be hours away. Behind him, Tyler's movements had gone silent, which somehow felt more threatening than the sound of pursuit. The forest seemed to close in around him, every shadow potentially concealing the predator who knew these mountains better than Marcus knew his own neighborhood. His GPS showed a network of old logging roads that might lead back to civilization, but following them would mean descending back toward the valley where Tyler held every advantage. A twig snapped somewhere to his left. Marcus froze, switching off his headlamp and plunging himself into complete darkness. The sound of his own heartbeat seemed thunderous in the silence. Minutes passed without movement, without sound, until Marcus began to wonder if he'd imagined it. Then Tyler's voice drifted through the trees, calm and conversational. "You know what my father's mistake was? He never understood what this place really wanted from us. Kept talking about rescue, about getting back to Mom, about the life we'd left behind. But the mountains don't let you go back. They change you, or they consume you." The voice was moving, circling, making it impossible to pinpoint Tyler's exact location. Marcus realized this was a tactic, psychological warfare designed to break down his defenses and force him into making a desperate mistake. "He lasted 3 years," Tyler continued, his voice now coming from a different direction entirely. 3 years of fighting what we'd become, of trying to maintain some connection to the world we'd lost. I tried to help him understand, but he was weak, couldn't accept that Tyler Harrison, the Boy Scout, the good son, that version of me had died the night we first found this valley. Marcus began moving again, stepping carefully to avoid making noise. His night vision was slowly adjusting, allowing him to make out the basic shapes of trees and rocks. But Tyler had the advantage of years of nocturnal hunting in this terrain. "The first hiker who found us was an accident," Tyler's voice continued, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "College kid got lost, stumbled into our camp. My father wanted to help him, wanted to guide him back to the main trail. But I could see what he really was, another mouth to feed, another person who could expose our location." A chill ran down Marcus's spine as he realized Tyler was describing his first kill, the moment when whatever remained of the 16-year-old boy had been permanently erased. "That's when I understood the rules. The mountains provide, but they also demand payment. Every person who finds this place is either a gift or a threat. My father never learned to tell the difference." Marcus's foot caught on a hidden root, sending him stumbling forward. The sound of his fall echoed through the forest like a gunshot. Immediately he heard Tyler moving, closing the distance with predatory speed. "There you are," Tyler called out, his voice now carrying genuine warmth, as if he were greeting an old friend. "Running won't help, you know. I've been tracking hikers through these woods for a decade. You're leaving a trail that might as well be painted in fluorescent colors." Marcus forced himself to keep moving, ignoring the burning in his lungs and the sharp pain from twisted ankle. The ridge began to descend slightly, and he could make out what looked like another valley system ahead. If he could reach it, perhaps the terrain would offer better hiding places, more options for escape. But as he crested a small rise, his worst fears were confirmed. Tyler was waiting for him, sitting casually on a fallen log directly in his path. The hunting knife was balanced across his knees, and his eyes reflected Marcus's headlamp beam like an animal's. 10 years, Tyler said conversationally. 10 years of people asking what happened to us, where we went, why we never came home. If they only knew how close they were. Search teams walked within a quarter-mile of our camp dozens of times. But they were looking for victims, not predators. Marcus backed away slowly, but Tyler made no move to pursue. He seemed content to talk, to finally have an audience for a story he'd been carrying alone for a decade. "The car was my father's idea. One last desperate attempt to escape, to return to civilization. He'd hidden it in the old logging camp years earlier, before he fully understood what we'd become. Kept talking about driving out, about explaining everything to Mom, about somehow going back to our old lives." Tyler stood up slowly, the knife still balanced in his hands. "But you can't go back. The mountains mark you, change your DNA, rewrite your soul. The person who walks out isn't the same one who walked in. My father couldn't accept that truth, so I helped him understand it permanently." The implication was clear. Michael Harrison hadn't died in some hiking accident. His own son had killed him, consumed by whatever darkness the wilderness had awakened in him. The others who found us over the years, they all made the same mistake. They saw a survivor, someone who needed rescue, someone they could help. They never recognized the apex predator that the mountains had created. By the time they understood, it was already too late. Marcus's emergency beacon continued its steady pulse, but rescue felt impossibly distant. Even if search teams were already mobilizing, they'd need hours to reach this remote location. Hours he didn't have. "You're different, though," Tyler continued, beginning to move in a slow circle around Marcus. "More cautious, better prepared. You documented everything properly, took photos, followed protocol. You have skills that could be useful in maintaining this operation." The word operation sent ice through Marcus's veins. This wasn't just random violence or the actions of someone driven insane by isolation. Tyler had built something systematic, sustainable, a machine for processing the hikers who wandered too far from marked trails. The bones you saw, they're not just trophies. They're tools. Fertilizer for the food plots I maintain, building materials for shelters and traps, bait for the animals I hunt. Nothing gets wasted in this ecosystem. Everyone contributes, even after they've stopped breathing. Tyler's casual description of his victims as raw materials was perhaps more disturbing than outright threats. This was someone who had moved beyond normal human psychology into something alien and mechanical. "Your emergency beacon is broadcasting to search and rescue services," Tyler noted, as if discussing the weather. "I can see the transmission indicator from here. Very responsible. But you should know that I've dealt with rescue teams before. They follow predictable patterns, use standard equipment, operate under rules designed for civilized situations." Marcus managed to evade Tyler through the night, leading rescue teams directly to the hidden valley and its horrific secrets. Tyler Harrison was captured after a manhunt that revealed the remains of 17 missing hikers spanning a decade. Sarah Harrison finally received the closure she desperately sought, though the truth proved more devastating than she'd ever imagined. The Appalachian Trail still calls to adventurers seeking solitude, but some secrets should remain buried in the mountains forever.